Baby girl found a German shepherd carrying a torn teddy bear. What happened next melted hearts. What happens when the impossible becomes reality? A tiny voice and a pure heart turn the impossible into a beautiful miracle. This story is one of survival, love, and an unbreakable connection. Like, share, and subscribe. You won't want to miss the magic of this journey. The afternoon light was soft and golden, spilling through the canopy of maple trees like warm honey. It was the kind of autumn day that made the air crisp but gentle, with the faint smell of rain still clinging to the ground from the morning's drizzle. A quiet park stretched ahead, empty swings swaying slowly in the breeze, benches dusted with fallen leaves, and the sound of crows calling somewhere far beyond the trees. On the winding grassy path, a tiny figure wobbled forward. Barely old enough to walk without falling, the baby girl was bundled in a little pink sweater, her tiny shoes shuffling through the leaves that crunched beneath her feet. Her mother followed only a few steps behind, smiling quietly as she kept her eyes fixed on her daughter's small, determined journey toward the playground. But then, the child froze. From behind a cluster of overgrown bushes, a shape emerged. At first, it was just a shadow, large, solid, moving slowly. And then out stepped a German shepherd. His fur was slightly scruffy, as if the wind had been his only comb for days. His paws pressed down softly on the carpet of gold and brown leaves, each step making the faintest crunch. In his mouth, he carried a small teddy bear, faded, torn at the seams, one button eye missing. The sight was so unexpected, so strange, that the baby girl tilted her head as though trying to understand what she was seeing. The dog's eyes, deep brown and heavy with something unspoken, locked on hers. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, the teddy bear dangling gently from his jaws as though it were something precious. Her mother caught up in a moment, instinctively stepping forward, ready to scoop her daughter into her arms. But she stopped when she noticed the dog's stillness, the way he seemed almost careful, protective even. A breeze passed through, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves, the faintest whiff of rain still in the air. The German shepherd's ears flicked at the sound of a far-off car passing, but his gaze never left the child. The teddy bear swayed slightly in his mouth as he shifted his weight, his eyes softening. And there, in that quiet standoff between a wandering baby and a weary dog, something unexplainable seemed to pass between them. Curiosity from her, caution from him, and a thread of connection neither of them could name. The mother's voice was gentle but cautious. "Sweetheart, come here." But the girl took one small, wobbling step closer to the dog. No one in that moment, not the child, not her mother, not even the German shepherd himself, could have guessed that the story behind that worn and torn teddy bear would change both of their lives forever. The neighborhood where Ava lived wasn't just a collection of houses. It was a place where doors stayed unlocked during the day, where the postman knew every child's name, and where neighbors lingered on sidewalks just to chat. The streets were lined with tall oak and maple trees whose branches seemed to reach out to one another, creating a green and gold tunnel in summer and a fiery canopy in autumn. Little corner shops sold fresh bread, flowers, and secondhand books, and the shopkeepers greeted passers-by with a familiar wave, sometimes slipping a candy into a child's hand with a wink. Children sped down the streets on bikes with colorful streamers fluttering from their handlebars, calling out to one another as they zigzagged between the driveways. Elderly couples took slow afternoon strolls, holding hands and pausing to greet the younger parents. In the evenings, the scent of freshly baked pies or slow-cooked stews drifted from kitchen windows, mingling with the distant chime of the church bell at the town square. Among all this warmth and routine was little Ava, the kind of baby who carried wonder in her eyes like a permanent sparkle. Barely a year and a half old, she was still mastering the art of steady walking. Every step was a small adventure for her. Her dark curls bounced as she moved, and her chubby hands were almost always clutching her beloved plush bunny, whose ears had long since gone floppy from being dragged across countless sidewalks and playgrounds. Ava loved animals with a devotion too big for her small frame. A passing squirrel could make her clap her hands in excitement, and the flutter of a pigeon's wings was enough to send her toddling after it in awe. Dogs were her favorite. Her little squeals and outstretched hands made that clear to everyone who saw her at the park. Whether they were big or small, sleek or shaggy, she looked at them as if each one was a magical creature she had been waiting her whole life to meet. And then there was the German Shepherd. He didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. People had seen him now and then, a flash of tan and black fur moving silently between the trees or sitting on the far side of the park as if watching but never approaching. The locals had quietly named him Hunter, though no one knew if that was truly his name. He had a strong build, the kind of presence that made you pause, but his eyes carried a weight that hinted at a story no one had heard. Sometimes, a child would point him out, only for Hunter to vanish before the parents could get a good look. He never lingered for long. There was something almost deliberate about the way he appeared and disappeared, like a shadow slipping between two worlds. And there was one detail that had started to catch people's attention. On rare occasions, he was seen with something in his mouth. A scrap of cloth. A soft toy. Once, what looked like an old shoe. It wasn't enough to spark alarm, but it did stir curiosity. What was a dog like him doing with a teddy bear or a piece of fabric? And where did he go when he left the park so quickly? No one followed him far enough to find out. For Ava, the park was a kingdom of exploration. She would toddle toward the swings, wander to the flower beds, and sometimes plop down in the grass just to watch the ants march in a line. Her mother, Claire, always stayed close enough to catch her if she stumbled, but far enough to let her explore at her own pace. Claire was well known among the neighbors, the kind of person who could never pass by without exchanging a warm greeting or stopping for a short conversation. It was common for their walks to take twice as long as planned because Claire would be pulled into conversations at every corner. Ava didn't mind. It gave her more time to investigate a patch of dandelions or to wave at passing dogs. On most days, the rhythm was predictable: a slow stroll, a few friendly chats, a stop at the bakery, and then some playtime at the park before heading home for lunch. But sometimes, in the corner of her eye, Claire thought she saw a movement at the edge of the park, a flash of fur between the bushes. She would glance over, only to find nothing there. She dismissed it as her imagination, until the day she noticed Ava staring at something across the field, her bunny dangling forgotten at her side. It was Hunter, standing still, half hidden behind the playground fence, something pale and worn gripped in his mouth. He didn't come closer, and he didn't run away. His gaze shifted from Ava to Claire, as if measuring the distance, the intent, the safety. Then, without a sound, he turned and slipped back into the shadows of the trees. Claire's brows furrowed. There was something deliberate about his movements, something that hinted at both caution and purpose. She didn't mention it to anyone that day, but the image stayed with her. And while Ava might have been too young to explain what she saw, her wide eyes and quiet stillness told her mother that the little girl had noticed more than she let on. In the weeks to come, Hunter would appear again, never close enough to touch, but never so far that he couldn't be seen. And always, without fail, there was something in his mouth. The sightings became almost like whispers in the neighborhood, passed between shopkeepers and neighbors. That shepherd was here again today. I saw him near the park this morning, had something with him. No one knew the truth yet. But Ava's gentle fascination and Hunter's cautious appearances were on a slow, quiet path toward something neither of them, nor anyone else, could have predicted. The park was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that made even the soft crunch of leaves underfoot sound loud. A gentle breeze carried the smell of damp earth and fading autumn blooms. Ava, bundled in her little cream sweater, toddled ahead on the grassy path, her plush bunny bouncing against her side with every determined step. Claire followed just a few paces behind, sipping from her coffee cup, eyes scanning the path but letting her daughter's curiosity guide their pace. Ava stopped suddenly. She tilted her head, her wide eyes fixed on something just beyond the low hedge near the old oak tree. Claire followed her gaze, and that's when she saw him. Hunter. He stepped out from behind the bushes as if the air itself had quietly parted for him. His tan and black coat looked a little unkempt, the fur along his neck thick from the coming winter chill. His large paws pressed gently into the grass, each step deliberate, slow. And in his mouth, the same worn teddy bear. It wasn't the bright, new kind of toy a child might have picked from a store shelf. This one was faded, its fur rubbed bare in spots, one button eye missing. The stuffing showed faintly from a small tear along its side. But it wasn't ragged in the way of something discarded. It looked carried, kept, almost protected. Hunter stopped a few yards away from Ava. His body stilled, but his ears twitched, catching every rustle of the leaves and the faint hum of traffic from the street beyond. His tail hung low, not tucked between his legs in fear, but lowered in caution, as though he wasn't quite sure if this was a moment to trust or retreat. His dark eyes moved from Ava to Claire and then back again, measuring the space, the silence, and the intentions hanging between them. Ava giggled. It was the light, bubbling kind of laugh that only a child her age could make, pure, without hesitation, free from all the fears and calculations that older hearts carried. She lifted her tiny hand, palm open, fingers curling slightly toward herself in that universal gesture children use when they want to call an animal closer. Claire's breath caught. Her first instinct was to step forward, to scoop Ava up and create some distance. But something in the dog's posture stopped her, a strange blend of alertness and gentleness, as though he was braced for any sudden move yet didn't want to frighten the little girl. Hunter's gaze lingered on Ava's outstretched hand. For a long moment, neither moved. The only sound was the faint rustle of the trees above them and the steady hum of the wind passing through. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Hunter lowered his head. The teddy bear dangled for a second longer before slipping gently from his mouth to the grass. He didn't nudge it toward her. He didn't bark. He simply placed it there, his eyes never leaving hers. Ava took a small step forward, her bunny dragging in the dirt now, but Claire's quiet, "Stay close, sweetheart," froze her in place. The dog didn't move to close the gap either. He simply stood there, chest rising and falling in a calm but measured rhythm, tail swaying just slightly, the smallest hint of a wag, like a whisper of trust trying to form. And then, as if the moment had reached its perfect, fragile peak, Hunter turned. No rush, no panic. Just a slow pivot toward the line of trees beyond the park's edge. His large frame moved with a quiet strength, paws brushing through the leaves until he slipped once more into the cover of the bushes. The teddy bear remained where he had placed it, a small, soft monument to a meeting that had lasted less than a minute but felt much longer. Ava looked up at her mother with wide, questioning eyes, as if silently asking whether they should follow. Claire crouched beside her, glancing toward the now empty space where the shepherd had stood. She touched the worn fabric of the teddy bear with her fingertips. It was damp, probably from being carried for so long, but it was warm too, faintly, almost like the lingering memory of the dog's steady breath. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Claire found herself thinking of all the times she'd heard neighbors mention the mysterious shepherd, always from a distance, always with something in his mouth. She'd never imagined her daughter would be the one he approached, if only for a moment. Ava bent down in her unsteady way, picked up the teddy bear, and hugged it to her chest alongside her bunny. She didn't know why the dog had left it or what it meant, but in her child's mind, she understood enough. It was important to him, and now he had given it to her. Claire smiled faintly, brushing a leaf from Ava's hair, but inside her mind, questions turned over and over. Why the teddy bear? Why her daughter? And where did the dog go when he vanished into the trees? They didn't have those answers yet. But both mother and daughter knew this wasn't the end of the story. The bear in Ava's arms was more than just a toy. It was an unspoken promise that the paths of a little girl and a lone shepherd would cross again. The next morning, the park looked almost the same as it had before, the golden leaves drifting down in lazy spirals, the gentle rustle of branches overhead. But for Ava, something was different now. She wasn't just wandering today, she was looking. Her little legs carried her forward with purpose, her bunny tucked under one arm, and her free hand gripping the worn teddy bear the mysterious dog had left for her. Her mother noticed it right away. Claire could see the way Ava's gaze darted toward the bushes near the old oak tree, her body leaning forward as if willing the dog to appear. They lingered by the spot longer than usual, but the shepherd didn't come. Instead, a squirrel scurried across their path, and Ava half-heartedly followed before stopping again, glancing back. The day ended without a sighting, but Ava's quiet insistence began to form a routine. Every afternoon, they returned to the park. Sometimes they'd sit on the bench near the playground. Other times, they'd walk the grassy loop twice, just in case. And sometimes, just as they were about to give up, Hunter would appear. It was never the same way twice. Once, he came from the path by the river, paws damp and fur glistening in the sunlight. Another time, he emerged silently from the shadows beneath the swings. But no matter where he came from, he always carried the teddy bear. It was the same one, no mistake about it. Its faded fabric looked a little worse each time, as though the days and nights spent outside were wearing it thin. A new tear had appeared along one arm, and the single button eye seemed to hang by a looser thread. Yet Hunter carried it gently, always holding it in his mouth as if it were made of something far more fragile than cloth. Claire began to notice the subtle pattern in his visits. He would stop just far enough away to keep control of the space between them. His eyes stayed sharp, studying Ava in a way that was both protective and wary. And Ava never rushed him. She would simply sit down on the grass, cross-legged in her toddler way, and place a few tiny biscuits on the ground in front of her. At first, Hunter would wait. Sometimes it was nearly 5 minutes before he would move forward. His steps were slow, deliberate, as though each one was a decision he had to weigh. He'd reach the biscuits, take them delicately between his teeth, and retreat, all without looking away from Ava. But over the days, something shifted. He began to stay just a little longer. Sometimes his tail would sway gently. Sometimes he would lower his head, the teddy bear resting in the grass while he ate. Once, he even sniffed Ava's bunny toy before stepping back again. The other park regulars started to notice. Mrs. Daniels, who walked her poodle every morning, paused one day to watch the quiet exchange. "That's the stray shepherd, isn't it?" she murmured to Claire. "I've seen him near the old Miller house, but no one lives there anymore." Claire hesitated before asking, "Do you know where he came from?" Mrs. Daniels shook her head. "Only what I've heard. Folks say there was a family with 2 little boys and a dog just like him. Moved away about, 3 months ago? Some say they left him behind. Others think he ran off and couldn't find them again." She gave a small shrug, the kind that tries to soften something unpleasant. "Hard to know what's true." The story gnawed at Claire. She began asking around more deliberately, the barista at the corner cafe, the man who ran the local hardware shop, even the mail carrier who passed through every day. Everyone had seen the shepherd at one time or another. Some swore he had a home but liked to roam. Others were certain he was on his own now. One thing was always the same in every account. He was never without that teddy bear. The more Claire learned, the more she watched Ava and Hunter's growing connection. The shepherd seemed to recognize her daughter now, his steps toward her less hesitant, his eyes softer. And Ava, even without understanding the weight of the rumors, treated each meeting like a treasured gift. She would talk to him in her gentle, sing-song way, telling him about the ducks on the pond or the color of the leaves. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the park in golden light, Claire noticed something different. Hunter emerged from the trees near the riverbank, his gait just slightly uneven. It was subtle, a faint hitch in his step as his right paw touched the ground. Her eyes narrowed as she followed his movement. He carried the teddy bear as always, but now it looked even more battered. A long tear split the fabric along the side, the stuffing visible in small tufts. The bear's remaining eye had finally fallen off, leaving an empty circle of thread. Ava gasped softly when she saw him, her little voice calling, "Teddy dog." She crouched to set out the biscuits, but Claire's attention stayed fixed on the limp. Hunter's paw wasn't bloody, but the way he shifted his weight told her something wasn't right. As he reached Ava, the shepherd dropped the teddy bear almost at her feet, closer than ever before. He bent to take a biscuit, then another, but his eyes weren't as bright today. Claire could see it now, the slight wince with each movement, the deeper weariness in his posture. The air between them felt different, heavier somehow. Ava reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of his fur before he stepped back again. He picked up the teddy bear, holding it almost higher this time, and turned toward the trees. Claire's chest tightened as she watched him disappear once more into the shadows, that faint limp following him like a ghost. She knew this wasn't just a curious friendship anymore. It was turning into something else. Something that might require her to step in before the story's next chapter unfolded. The rain had been falling since dawn, a steady, silver curtain that softened the edges of the park and sent most people indoors. Puddles formed in the dips along the path, and the golden leaves from last week now lay matted and dark against the wet earth. Claire hadn't planned on taking Ava out that afternoon, but the toddler had been restless, pointing toward the door with the quiet insistence only a child could manage. Against her better judgment, Claire bundled her up in her little yellow raincoat and rubber boots, tucking her plush bunny under one arm for company. They had only meant to circle the block, maybe stop at the bakery, but Ava's gaze kept flicking toward the park gates. Claire followed her instinct and turned in, the rain beating on her hood, boots squelching softly on the damp grass. That's when Ava froze, her tiny mittened hand tightening around her mother's finger. Beneath the sprawling branches of an old oak tree, Hunter lay curled on the sodden ground. The teddy bear was beside him, its once brown fur now almost the same muted shade as the mud, one leg dangling limply, the stuffing threatening to spill. Hunter's head rested on his paws, his eyes half-lidded, chest rising and falling with a sluggish rhythm that made Claire's stomach twist. For a moment, the only sound was the rain whispering through the branches above them. Then Ava let out a small, questioning sound, not quite a word, more of a gentle hum, and started toward him. Claire's hand instinctively tightened, ready to pull her back, but something in Hunter's stillness gave her pause. He didn't flinch. He didn't get up and retreat into the shadows as he always had before. He simply lay there, watching them approach, the same deep, searching look in his eyes, but now tinged with something heavier, fatigue, maybe pain. Claire crouched a few feet away, her voice low, the way one might speak to a skittish animal or a frightened child. "Hey there, boy, it's okay. We're not here to hurt you." Rain dripped from the brim of her hood as she studied him more closely. That limp she had noticed last time was worse now. His right paw was drawn up slightly, and even from here she could see the raw, reddened mark near the pad, a small cut, but likely enough to make walking painful. His ribs were faintly visible beneath the damp fur, his coat duller than it had been just days before. Hunter's gaze shifted briefly to Ava, who had crouched down beside her mother. She was holding her plush bunny in both hands, the rain beginning to darken its ears. Without hesitation, she leaned forward and placed it gently on the wet ground beside his teddy bear. The two toys lay there together, one tattered by time and weather, the other still soft and new, like a quiet offering from one friend to another. Claire's throat tightened at the sight. Something passed between the child and the dog then, unspoken but unmistakable. "We can't just leave him here," she said softly, more to herself than to Ava. She knew that if they walked away now, she would carry the image with her forever, the weary shepherd curled around his one possession, the rain falling harder, the park emptying into dusk. Pulling out her phone with cold, damp fingers, she dialed the local vet clinic first. When she explained the situation, the receptionist's tone turned brisk but kind, asking for their location and promising to contact the animal rescue team. The minutes that followed stretched longer than they should have. Ava sat in the grass without complaint, her small body hunched forward, watching Hunter with unwavering attention. Occasionally, she would babble something to him in her toddler's language, her words tumbling over one another in a melody only she understood. Hunter didn't move, but his ears flicked faintly toward her voice. When the rescue van finally pulled into the park, its headlights slicing through the misty rain, Claire felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Two people stepped out, one carrying a large blanket, the other a sturdy, weatherproof crate. They approached slowly, speaking in the same low, careful tones Claire had used. Hunter's eyes darted toward them, his body tensing slightly, but he didn't rise. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on Ava, as if drawing some measure of calm from her presence. The rescuers knelt beside him, examining the paw and running gentle hands over his frame. "He's underweight," one murmured to the other, "and that cut needs attention." They eased the blanket under him, coaxing him to stand just enough to be lifted. Claire felt Ava shift beside her, her little hands curling into the edge of her raincoat as she watched. Hunter didn't fight them. He allowed himself to be guided into the crate, his movements slow but without resistance. Just before they closed the door, he turned his head toward Ava. The rain ran in thin rivulets over the crate's bars, blurring the space between them, but Claire could see it, that steady, unblinking look. Ava stepped closer, pressing her tiny hand to the wet metal. "Bye-bye, Teddy dog," she whispered. Hunter's eyes stayed on her until the van door slid shut. Then the engine started, and in a wash of headlights and rain, the vehicle pulled away, carrying him out of sight. Claire scooped Ava up, her daughter's damp bunny toy pressed between them. The park seemed quieter now, the rain softer, but the space beneath the oak tree felt impossibly empty. They stood there for a moment longer, the puddles rippling at their feet, before turning toward home. Neither of them said it out loud, one because she couldn't yet form the words, the other because speaking them might make the ache sharper, but both knew the same truth. They weren't ready for this story to end here. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under a pale winter sun. Claire woke to the sound of Ava calling softly from her crib, the little girl clutching her plush bunny in one hand. The events of the previous afternoon were still vivid in Claire's mind, Hunter's weary eyes, the crate door closing, the way Ava had pressed her tiny hand against the cold metal as if promising she'd see him again. By mid-morning, they were walking up the path to the vet clinic, a small, brick-front building with planters flanking the entrance and the faint smell of antiseptic and dog shampoo drifting out as the door opened. Inside, the receptionist recognized them instantly, her smile tinged with warmth. "You're here to see Hunter, aren't you?" Ava nodded shyly, though the woman hadn't addressed her directly. She still had her bunny clutched tight, its ears a little limp from yesterday's rain. They were led down a short hallway to a recovery room, where a row of clean kennels lined one wall. In the second one from the end, Hunter was lying on a thick blanket, his front paw neatly bandaged, the old teddy bear tucked close to his chest like a sentinel. His head lifted as soon as they stepped in, and for a fleeting second, the dullness in his eyes gave way to recognition. Ava giggled softly and pressed her small hand against the kennel door. Claire crouched beside her, murmuring, "It's okay, boy. We're just here to say hello." The vet, a kind-eyed woman named Dr. Patel, stepped in then, giving Hunter a reassuring pat. "He's doing better than we expected," she said. "Dehydrated, underweight, but he's responding well to treatment. The paw will heal fine in a couple of weeks." Claire glanced at the teddy bear lying beside him. Its fabric was worn almost to threads, one ear gone entirely, but it was clear he'd kept it close for a long time. Dr. Patel must have noticed her gaze, because she smiled softly. "We think this belonged to his previous family. Dogs often hold on to comfort items like this, especially when they've lost everything else." Ava didn't understand the full meaning of those words, but she seemed to sense the weight behind them. She tapped the glass again and whispered, "Teddy dog." Over the next week, visiting Hunter became part of their daily rhythm. After breakfast, they would bundle up and make the short walk to the clinic. Sometimes they brought small biscuits wrapped in paper. Other days, Ava carried one of her picture books and read to him through the bars in her own toddler way, flipping pages with chubby fingers. Word of the rescue had spread quickly through their neighborhood. At first, it was just curious passers-by stopping Claire in the street to ask about the shepherd from the park. But soon, people began showing up at the clinic with toys, blankets, and bags of food. A soft bed from the couple who owned the hardware store, a plush, squeaky bone from the teenager who delivered newspapers. One elderly woman knitted a scarf for him, insisting, "Every dog deserves a little dignity in winter." Hunter seemed to change with each passing day. The guarded stiffness in his posture began to soften. The limp was still there, but he would now get up to greet Ava, his nose bumping the bars gently, tail giving the faintest of wags. The first time that wag grew into a steady, happy rhythm, Ava squealed with delight, clapping her hands together. Claire noticed, too, that the teddy bear was beginning to lose its place as his constant anchor. On their fifth visit, she watched as Ava sat cross-legged on the floor beside his kennel, chattering about the ducks they'd seen in the park. Hunter nudged the bear aside and instead pressed his head against the bars nearest her knee. By the end of the second week, the transformation was unmistakable. His coat had begun to shine again, his eyes clearer and more alert. Dr. Patel allowed them to take him into the small enclosed yard behind the clinic for some gentle exercise. Ava toddled around in her little boots, giggling every time Hunter followed her slow zigzag path. At one point, she tripped and landed in the grass, but before Claire could reach her, Hunter was there, standing protectively at her side, as if he'd always belonged in that role. That afternoon, something happened that Claire knew she'd remember for the rest of her life. Ava had been sitting in the grass with Hunter lying beside her, the teddy bear a few inches away. Without prompting, Hunter picked up the toy in his mouth and set it down near her feet. Then, instead of curling back around it, he lowered his head and rested it squarely in her lap. Ava froze for a moment, then began stroking the fur between his ears with small, careful hands. Claire caught Dr. Patel's eye, and the vet's smile said everything. Trust had been earned. It was a quiet moment, not marked by applause or grand gestures, but it carried the weight of something irreversible. Whatever Hunter's past had been, whatever loneliness or loss he had endured, there was no mistaking that he'd found something new here. When it was time to leave, Ava stood and waved at him from the doorway, calling in her sing-song voice, "Bye-bye, Teddy dog." Hunter didn't pick up the bear this time. He simply watched her go, tail swaying in slow, content arcs, his eyes following her until she disappeared from view. The air outside was crisp, the late afternoon sun filtering gold through the bare branches. Claire glanced down at her daughter, who was skipping along with her bunny tucked under one arm, and thought about how quickly small acts could bloom into something bigger. Hunter was healing, and somewhere deep in her bones, Claire knew that their story, was only just beginning. The park looked different now, though the same golden leaves drifted lazily down from the trees. Maybe it was the way the sunlight spilled in wide, gentle strokes across the grass, or maybe it was simply because everything felt lighter. Where once Hunter had appeared out of the shadows with cautious steps and a battered teddy bear, he now bounded across the open field with the ease of a dog who knew exactly where he belonged. Ava squealed with delight as he raced toward her, his fur catching the autumn light like brushed copper. She was holding the teddy bear, not tattered anymore, but stitched and cleaned, its missing ear replaced with one her mother had sewn from a scrap of Ava's old baby blanket. It had become more than a toy. It was a bridge between two very different lives that had somehow found their way into the same story. Claire watched from a bench nearby, coffee cup warming her hands, heart warming even more at the sight before her. Hunter slowed as he reached Ava, lowering his head so she could wrap her tiny arms around his neck. She whispered something only he could hear, her cheek pressed against his fur. Then she pulled back, holding up the teddy bear as if to show him, and he took it gently in his mouth before trotting beside her in a slow, companionable circle. There was no fear in his eyes now, no trace of the guarded watchfulness that had once kept him apart from everyone. His tail moved in an easy rhythm, his ears flicking forward at the sound of Ava's laugh. Around them, life in the park carried on. Children on swings, the hum of a distant lawn mower, the faint chatter of neighbors. But here, in this little pocket of the world, it was just the two of them, bound by a simple, wordless promise. The narrator's voice could almost be felt in the air, a soft thread weaving through the scene. Sometimes the smallest hands offer the greatest healing, and sometimes love comes carrying a torn teddy bear. Ava ran ahead a few steps, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Hunter was still with her. Of course he was. His loyalty now as natural as the turning of the seasons. She stopped suddenly, dropped to her knees in the grass, and held out her arms. Hunter padded up, setting the teddy bear in her lap before leaning in to nuzzle her cheek. Claire lifted her phone, snapping a picture without them noticing. She wanted to remember this exact moment. The repaired toy, the warm light, the way Hunter seemed to smile in his own quiet way. She knew there had been sadness in his story once, just as there had been uncertainty in hers when she'd first seen her daughter toddle toward a strange dog. But those days were over. Hunter belonged now, to Ava, to their family, to the whole neighborhood that had rallied around him. And perhaps, in some unspoken way, they all belonged to him too. As the scene faded, the sound of soft piano music swelled, mingling with the distant laughter of children. On the screen, the image of Ava and Hunter lingered, a little girl and her dog, side by side, carrying not just a repaired teddy bear, but a story of trust, rescue, and love. And with that, the invitation came, warm and genuine. If you've ever witnessed or been part of a rescue that changed a life, share your story with us in the comments. You never know whose heart it might touch next. Every story has its ending, but the emotions last forever. Thank you for your time, your heart, and your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, hit the like button and share the love. Until we meet again in another story.